What is going on, everybody? It is another episode of the 5280 podcast. I want to say thank you guys for hopping on the stream as usual. You guys can all, as we've been saying earlier, you guys can check us out over there on YouTube, over there on Twitch. We are also streaming on the X platform, the X Twitter platform. I currently have my Twitter linked, so you guys can also go check it there over at Cameron Parker PO. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are on YouTube. My goal that I've been trying to pump through and in terms of the network is to get us to 2,000 subscribers by the end of 2025. So again, thank you guys so much for hopping in with us. It's going to be a phenomenal show. And as you can clearly tell, there's two of the four members once again over here on the 5280 podcast. Mike is still dealing with I believe it's a family basketball matter where he's got to go help out over there. Glenn,
no, he's still on IR from his terrible Travis Hunter tank.
We
haven't taken him off IR yet.
That's right. We haven't exactly taken him off of IR. Glenn is dealing with I want to say it was a bit of a back thing. So he decided to put himself on the injured list, if you will. And so he is unable to join. I'm sure we'll probably see him on the stream, though. Nonetheless, it's going to be a phenomenal show. There is, as you guys know, a lot to talk about. So even as we kind of are entering a little bit of the doldrums of what is soon to be the NFL offseason, there will always be something to talk about with Gage and I. And Gage, before we start, you doing well? You doing good?
Doing excellent, yes. I just got back from the East-West Shrine Bowl down in Texas. We're going to be talking about that in this show. Got a lot of very valuable pieces of information in terms of players that the Denver Broncos could be interested in. Some players told me directly that they spoke with the Denver Broncos when I got the chance to interview them. So we'll go ahead and drop some of those nuggets here in this show. But how are you doing, Cam?
Doing good, surviving. It is Tuesday. We made it through Monday. We're gonna make it through one other day, and then we'll be closer enough, until we get further to the weekend, which it'll be, we'll have another weekend of football. It won't be, playoff football because as we are entering the Super Bowl, but it's nonetheless it's going to be another football-filled weekend. But first things first, we probably should lead it off with the one that makes us all cry, and that is the Kansas City Chiefs are once again headed to the Super Bowl. It is the Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles. It is the rematch of the Super Bowl 2 years ago, where Jalen Hurts outplayed Patrick Mahomes and should have beaten the Kansas City Chiefs if it wasn't for some key turnovers there and a fumble recovery from Nick Bolton. But nonetheless, the Chiefs, won that Super Bowl. And I feel like it's somewhat fitting that if the Eagles by chance put an end to this repeat, it would be the team that was the losing end that started it all. And it would be the Philadelphia Eagles. So it's a hard one to process, because there's so much to talk about there, Gage. But, there was so much, that was said by either people in, Denver media or, so on and so forth about greatness. And, and while I understand that in terms of what we're seeing as greatness, there's also a series of annoyance. And right now you got to call it for what it is. And it's super annoying seeing the Kansas City Chiefs take it one more time again for a possible three-peat.
Especially the way that it happened in this game. I'm not somebody who normally criticizes officials. I think that they are doing the best that they can given the limited resources in terms of technology that the NFL gives them, as well as the fact that, let's just be honest, they are all human beings. We screw up as human beings. It's just human nature. But these cases of clear and obvious bias towards the Kansas City Chiefs compromises the integrity of this game. $30 billion. That is the annual number of gambling dollars that are placed on the lines for the NFL every single year. And it just feels like that money is being compromised and not being put on lines fairly when you have these games being rigged by the officials. Multiple terrible calls. I mean, Josh Allen, that quarterback sneak, we can talk about that one being kind of borderline. One official comes in, says it's a first down. Probably the more senior official comes in and overrules him. Then they have to take it to replay, and there's no clear and obvious angle that showed the football was clearly and obviously forward. Gene Steratore thought that the ball crossed by like the tip of the ball, but I can understand that one. What I can't understand is the offsides on Ed Oliver. He timed the cadence perfectly. The bobbled catch by Xavier Worthy, that looked like that was a pick. And at bare minimum, it looked like the ball hit the ground. And that one still stood as a catch in replay. Travis Kelce was taunting in the end zone after Patrick Mahomes' rushing touchdown, and he didn't get called for taunting. And there's just so many other examples where the Bills would not get these calls, and Kansas City did. And that's the theme of this entire season with this Kansas City Chiefs team. It just feels like the NFL is forcing this three-peat to happen. And we all know there's going to be some of the same bullshit that happens in the Super Bowl. And the NFL wants to bring in the Swifties, but they may have lost some diehard fans. I see people left and right saying that they aren't going to watch this Super Bowl because of the bullshit, horrible product that the NFL has forced upon us.
It is something, isn't it? You know, I mean, I like the way you phrase this because, you know, you and I always like we intellectually look at things, right? Like, you know, in terms of how we look at it all. And, you know, we aren't ones that, you know, in terms of like basically blame it on the refs, but just it is really hard when you look at just, and it isn't just this last Chiefs game, you know, it is even beyond that. Like it is so far this season, it is even last season. Like it is just, there are certain situations where you look at it where it tips the scale that is in favor of the Chiefs. And I'm not even going to use a Broncos game example, but the New York Jets and the Kansas City Chiefs example, where you have a game on, I want to say it was Monday night or Thursday night. It was a primetime game, and it was a clear interception by Sauce Gardner, not pass interference for the rare case that Sauce Gardner was not called. But you know, he literally is in the process of intercepting the football. It's in his hands. He's coming down with it, getting ready to run, and then at that moment the ref throws the flag. There was no instance of pass interference whatsoever. And the moment he catches the ball, comes down with it, and is getting ready to run, the ref throws the interception. Or sorry, it throws the flag for the pass interference. Like it's just that kind of stuff. And then to use some Bronco examples, right? Like there was the phantom pass interference penalty from a couple years back, from the Nate Hackett era, if you will, where the Broncos were supposed to be up 14-3. Actually, they were at 14-3. They were going to be up 21-3, you know, possibly with that drive. And then a phantom offensive pass interference penalty happens, and they call it on Courtland Sutton. You know, it's just those little things. And then, of course, you know, there's the holding penalty on the Philadelphia Eagles in that Super Bowl from 2 years back, where it was a costly holding penalty, which forced the Kansas City Chiefs to score on that drive, which I think thus it tied the game and whatever, you know, for that Super Bowl. It's just things that and I realize the statistics that are out there. You know, I realize these stats that are out there that say that, you know, there isn't any favoritism out there. And look, yes, there are stats that are out there. I'm going to get pissed, but there are stats, yes, that are out there that are in favor of the Kansas City Chiefs. But you ever think to when you look at the actual situation itself, like the situation itself, which lends it to be in favor of said team, right? Like, you ever think about it that way? Like, it's wild to me. It's all about situation. It's all about the moment. And every single time when it seems like the moment has been in favor of that other team, it's swung in favor of the Kansas City Chiefs. That particular sneak, right? That particular sneak, when you look at it, and Josh Allen does not get it, right? So that was the overall ruling, right? But you had a side judge come in who clearly thought it was a first down. You have another judge come in and basically overrule that one. Well, then you also get the vast majority of the broadcast team of not just Tony Romo and not just Jim Nantz, but Gene Steratore chiming in and saying, I thought that was a first down. Like, everybody else sees it. Everybody else sees it. But the ones who don't see it are the ones who apparently might actually have something on the Kansas City Chiefs for them to be calling it in favor of them every single time.
Yeah. And let me tell you one stat that really reflects this whole thing. The Kansas City Chiefs have not been called for one offensive hold in the playoffs since 2021. Not one. And what is probably the most detrimental offensive penalty? A holding call. It kills a drive. And the refs do not call holds on the Chiefs. And then there's a whole controversy about Jawan Taylor being able to leave a count early. And Ed Oliver, who perfectly times Patrick Mahomes' cadence, literally to a T, does not get or gets called for offsides. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And like I said earlier, it compromises the integrity of this game. And it feels terrible because I'm somebody who has staunchly defended the integrity of this game for a long time. And now it's making me look like a fool.
Yeah. And, it's one of the reasons why, there's a lot of changes. It certainly seems like things are going to be trending that way in 2025 of the full season, where replay assist is going to matter. Now, the problem with that is, in terms of the integrity of it, you can send it to replay all you want. You could send it to replay all you want. But when there's an agenda in place, there's an absolute agenda in place. It's not going to matter if it's replay assist. Case in point, this is not a Chiefs example. It's the Sean Payton game of the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Rams. A clear defensive pass interference penalty was made. They take it to review. They review it. So they spend a decent amount of time to try and review it. They come back and rule the fact that was not, defensive pass interference. And then, and then the Rams take over and the rest is history. The Rams ended up winning that game. Like, it does not matter when you have replay assist, if there is a simple agenda in place, that will always take precedent over anything else.
Yeah.
But as far as the three-peat itself, look, it's greatness. Don't get me wrong. It is greatness. But like, I think the thing that, some people need to understand is, I can't appreciate greatness when there is something that might be rigged along the way. That's my problem, and so if this was a simple three-peat where, I just, when you look at it just from the simple fact of, the betting side of things and betting on the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously, yeah, we're going to end up maybe looking at betting on the most obvious choice for sure. But like, if this was a honorable moment of a three-peat, then we would be looking at it from the standpoint of, yeah, this was a very solid three-peat. But you know what? There's an asterisk by it for me. I'm going to call it for what it is. Like, there's a true asterisk behind this three-peat because of the way that it's been handled by the refs. And I think that just because someone is showing greatness should never take away from the fact that, we as fans have to appreciate something or forced to appreciate something because of the fact that someone had, X number of Someone can have X number of Super Bowls or X number of championships all they want, but if they're also a disgusting human being, or the team's just overall something that we will never support, why would I want to support something that I don't want to support at all?
Yeah. And I see this argument all the time. Well, oh, the NFL is just entertainment. I'm somebody who loves the game of football, and I want to see the highest level of football be played fairly. And it sucks because you see the WWE, they're not so much being watched for the actual wrestling more than they are for the storylines and the entertainment and all that. I watch football, for the X's and O's, for the Jimmies and Joes. I watch football for all of that. And it just feels like the competitive integrity of the game that I love is being compromised. It sucks. It sucks so much.
Yeah. Kevin, you are right. Like I said, if we were going to be betting on the Kansas City Chiefs, we would be making money, obviously, but that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about, betting at all. And I think that as far as the Patriots and Deflategate, yeah, I would say that the Patriots would be considered an asterisk from a fan's perspective, for sure, because of the fact that they cheated along the way. And while things maybe have been a little bit different just from the optics of looking at it, like, and me and Gage, I think I've had this conversation before about how much we appreciate Tom Brady now.
Yes.
But a lot of that, I think, was the fact he left a lot of the New England Patriots and realizing that it was also probably the system that was in place with Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft. Right. And so so I just think that there were probably some certain levels of that where, it certainly is not going to take away for the fact that there's that asterisk, but it's just like, there's just moments where you have to call for what it is. And, you saying the integrity is lost is just so spot on, because the integrity of the game, you're losing it every single week because of that agenda.
And the people behind it can't get punished. You think about both Spygate scandals, Spygate 1 with the Patriots and then Spygate 2.0 here in Denver. All of the individuals that were behind that got punished. You think about Bountygate. All the individuals who were behind that got punished, at least the ones that got caught. You think about the John Gruden email scandal. The person who got caught, the person who had to be the fall guy, he got punished. Nobody's getting punished here. The NFL's not acknowledging that there's a problem. And until the NFL acknowledges that there's a problem, none of this is going to change. They can try this new replay assist stuff, but it's not going to matter, like you said earlier, when we're going to replay assist and they're still fucking these calls up.
Yeah. And, so obviously a lot of us, as you could clearly tell, will be rooting for the Philadelphia Eagles, in this particular Super Bowl. And I think when you look strictly at this Super Bowl from the matchup side of things, I do personally think that the Eagles match up quite well with the Kansas City Chiefs in the first time that they were there. The defensive line, I think, is certainly better. And, you have the Vic Fangio against Kansas City Chiefs type of situation where, yeah, Patrick Mahomes is undefeated against Vic Fangio. You got to call it for what it is. He is undefeated against Vic Fangio. But you look at the optics of the way that things went down with Fangio and, all across the board, there was probably no mastermind during those years that always had Mahomes in hell than Fangio. And so now you give him a little bit of a better roster to work with. And, while there are two rookies, with the corners, you also have Darius Slay. So you have Slay, Cooper DeJean, and Quinyon Mitchell that are playing at such an incredibly high level. So the secondary is a little bit better. The safety room is a little bit better based on the scheme and the coordination that Vic Fangio is starting to call. And, you have linebackers that are playing incredibly well. You have a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in Zach Bond, maybe a future Denver Bronco. The Broncos want to fork over a lot of money for Zach Bond. But I just think that, when you look overall with the Super Bowl, Gage, it does feel like the Eagles do match up quite well and better than in years past, or the last couple of years, if you will, when they faced them in that one Super Bowl.
And you have to call it for what it is. The Chiefs are worse in the trenches, especially on the offensive line. They've got Joe Tooney, a naturally trained guard, playing left tackle. They've got a backup level left guard in because they had to move their left guard to left tackle. And Jawan Taylor is a borderline liability at right tackle with all of the penalties that he gets. So I feel like the Kansas City Chiefs have a worse roster than they did when they faced the Philadelphia Eagles the first time. And like you said, the Philadelphia Eagles have a much better roster than they did the first time around. I think that on paper, this should match up well. How much will the officiating get in the way? How much interference will there be? Will the referees let them play? That's the big question of the day. We can sit here and talk about all the matchups that we want to, but it's going to be tough when you just don't know what's going to happen on any given down. Even if the Eagles do something right, it can be called back at any given official's discretion.
Yeah. I don't know if I would go, to that extent, Biggie, in terms of, ending Mahomes' career, because, at that moment, that's purposely injuring someone. And then at that point, you're entering Bounty Gate 2.0. Like you just, at that point, I mean, I understand
Bush League shit.
And yeah, that is some Bush League stuff. So I mean, I understand the logic. And we as fans certainly have had that logic before. But it's just that is stuff that's going to get you kicked out of the league, regardless of agenda or not. Like that's going to get you kicked out of the league, and specifically when it involves, the NFL's golden boy, they will kick you out of the league. And I think that what needs to be said here regarding the Super Bowl, and in terms of the Kansas City Chiefs, look, Andy Reid is a great head coach. I'm not trying to say that I'm not an Andy Reid fan, because I am. You and I both know, like we are Andy Reid fans, and it's more so about the other parts of the Chiefs and why we hate them, and not necessarily because of Andy Reid or Steve Spagnuolo. That said, if the Kansas City Chiefs do in fact win this Super Bowl, it is not because of Andy Reid. It is not because of Andy Reid. It is because of Steve Spagnuolo and the job that he has been able to do with this Chiefs defense. I think that one area where it's pretty obvious where they've upgraded that linebacker position. Now, Willie Gay is an impending free agent, maybe a free agent that the Broncos might actually entertain bringing in. But it seems like the pairing of Drew Tranquill and Nick Bolton has actually upgraded that linebacker room for the majority of that season. Defensive line, I think, is going to be a little bit interesting. I do think the mainstay of this team is that defensive line specifically. So the secondary probably is a bit of some work, and I'm very disappointed when a lot of people talk about Trent McDuffie, in the vein of, the Pats or Tans of the world. McDuffie's a phenomenal corner. Don't get me wrong. But like he's clearly taken a step back, in terms of a lot of some of these matchups. And so you look at AJ Brown, you look at, Devontae Smith, and, of course, some of the emergence in terms of, who's the wide receiver that they got?
Jahan
Dotson as well. So you had a little bit of the emergence there, and Dallas Goedert as well. Dallas Goedert's been emerging. So I just think that when you look at it just from the standpoint of that, the Kansas City Chiefs defense has done better.
Yes, I would definitely agree.
And again, Biggie, I realize what we were saying, but still, Bush League is Bush League, and like in just the overall moral compass of everything that we've been doing. Just overall, I'm never going to be personally just going and injuring someone and tearing his ACL because I just think that, the way that the agenda is going, I get all that. Like, I get all of that, and we hate certainly optics of it, but I am never going to physically hurt someone because of the agendas that are in place.
That compromises the integrity of the game just as much as officials manipulating the game. I will never be in favor of purposely injuring an opponent. I would never do that.
Yeah. So I get what we were saying in terms of the agenda and everything and what we just said, but to just typo on it, we're never going to go that far. What's up, Dreamweaver? What's up, Jay? How you doing? Appreciate you, buddy. Thanks for the shout out. Yeah. So, do you think that they win? Like, do you think that, just to tie a bow on all this before we move on, the Chiefs? Do you think the Chiefs will win, or do you think that the Eagles will actually come out and win?
Well, if the NFL gets their way, then yeah, the Chiefs will win. But if the Eagles go out there and they just take it away and they remove all say from the NFL in the matter and they just pound the Chiefs into submission, I could absolutely see them winning. They are the better team. 100%. The Philadelphia Eagles have the better roster. But the Chiefs have the NFL's golden boy, and they want the revenue that's going to come with the Chiefs three-peating. It sucks. It makes me want to puke, but it just feels like that's the way that the wind has been blowing really ever since that Tampa Bay Buccaneers game where the Buccaneers had it in the bag and they ended up blowing it. That just felt like ever since that moment, the Chiefs were going to have all of the BS go their way. So it's just kind of hard to analyze it fairly when you have this clear and obvious elephant in the room that is tainting your opinion.
Yeah. I'm still choosing the Eagles in terms of winning the game. And by the way, in terms of more record breaking, Saquon Barkley is 30 yards away from breaking Terrell Davis's postseason record. I think it's safe to say that record will be broken in this Super Bowl. And it sucks because the MVP voting was done as soon as Week 18 was taken care of. Hopefully, the right thing happens. It's not at all what we're expecting in terms of him being the MVP. But if there's one thing that certainly showed with that game against the Commanders, I think Saquon Barkley was probably the MVP this year based on everything that we have seen.
Yeah, 100%. I was at the Hyatt in Frisco, Texas, doing player interviews when the game had started, and Saquon Barkley broke it away immediately, and all of the NFL media and team executives that were in that room just went nuts. That first big rushing touchdown that he had, I mean, it was insane, the amount of tackles that he broke, the spin move that he put on that one defender. That was a special run. That's going to probably go down in like the Marshawn Lynch Beastquake run from 2011. That was that special. You could tell, man, that just from the moment the game started, the Philadelphia Eagles were in a completely different weight class than the Washington Commanders were. The Commanders have had a great run considering the overall lack of depth that they have on their roster, and I think that came back to bite them in the ass in this game. I mean, Philadelphia put up a 55-burger on them.
Mm-hmm.
So hats off to Washington for the season that they've had, but Philadelphia is just in a league of their own, man.
And one more time again, Dan Quinn's teams in the championship game have allowed an astonishing 37.5 points per game in championship games. Oh, wait, sorry. Because of that 50-point burger that they allowed, it actually gets bumped up to 38 points per game that Dan Quinn is allowed in championship games. So just want to throw that out there.
Mike.
Broncos game, some Broncos news and notes now. Quinn Miners was not the only person to turn down the Pro Bowl, as we found out today. Miners turned down the Pro Bowl invite in terms of to possibly replace Joe Thuney and Trey Smith, basically saying, I am no one's replacement. I need that quote framed, by the way. Yeah, he said, I am no one's replacement. But obviously, as we found out today, Drake May is heading to the Pro Bowl, as well as Russell Wilson. And I realized the optics of that look terrible from the Broncos side of things. But when you peel it back, they were going to be choosing Bo Nix. Bo Nix declined to go to the Pro Bowl because he is still dealing with the back injury from carrying the entire Broncos offense in 2024.
Yeah, and Mike Kliss said that he had a routine cleanup procedure. We're assuming it's the back that I believe wasn't officially confirmed, but it was some routine cleanup procedure. He's not going to miss any time once off-season activities start. He's going to be good to go for everything. So there's no concern there. It's not a major injury that Bo's dealing with, Broncos country. But yes, he did decline to go to the Pro Bowl. He had the opportunity, and if healthy, probably would have gone. And we can basically say that Bo Nix was a Pro Bowl quarterback. I mean, yes, it was as an alternate, but it's kind of like Trevor Siemian back in 2016, where he would have been named to the Pro Bowl as an alternate, as a replacement. I can't remember who it was for at the time, but he had to decline because of his messed up shoulder that he had. So, yeah, man, really cool stuff that Bo Nix was going to get that opportunity, but the injury did prevent that from happening.
So it'll be interesting, now that, at least the NFL was looking into the situation of Bo Nix. At least they were appreciative of the fact, for Bo Nix's season and everything that he had. And as we said, that's going to be lending off to Drake May and Russell Wilson, in favor of that. So they went with two quarterbacks there.
But just remember, guys, Tyler Huntley was a Pro Bowl quarterback.
Yes, Snoop Huntley, right? Because he changed name. Snoop Huntley ended up going to the Pro Bowl. As far as another news and note, and this is a big thing in terms of the Denver Broncos ownership group, the Broncos went ahead and donated $15,000 worth of new Rydell football helmets to every single Colorado high school. I think you and I and Glenn and Mike have always had this conversation about how much the ownership group cares for its players. And when we say its players, it means, the Denver Broncos, right? The team itself. Well, now that this has gone beyond, the Denver Broncos franchise and into all Colorado high schools, this is a new precedent. And I think that it goes to show you just how well tuned now our ownership group is, for not being involved in terms of football in general going into the NFL, right, Gage? The fact that they're now able to just look at it as a whole and understand, this isn't just about the Denver Broncos anymore. This is also about the future of football as a whole. So how can we impact that? And so pouring out the resources of not just 15,000, helmets, but it's also well more than that. It's, it's some of the electronic devices and stuff for sidelines and stuff for all the high schools. I think it should lend you guys to understand and appreciate that the Broncos really do have a one-of-one ownership group here in the Mile High City.
It's really cool seeing them plant that seed in the local community and help foster a better game for future generations, man. And as somebody who has talked about how much I love this game, that is something I can definitely appreciate. And those Rydell helmets are not cheap, man. They're over $1,000 a helmet. They are expensive. And I think they were the new Rydell Axiom ones that they just released a couple of years ago, which is some of the best in terms of preventing head injuries and helping keep players safe on the field, which is the most important thing at any level, but especially the high school level. Helping preserve their health is the most important thing. So this is a really awesome thing that Broncos ownership is doing. And the reason why we loved Pat Bowlen so much was because they weren't afraid to invest in the community, that whole family, and seeing the Walton Penner ownership group doing the same thing here in Denver is really awesome and makes me feel good about the direction that things are heading.
Yep. And as Big Mike mentions also into the chat, They gave 4-year subscriptions to scouting and data services for coaches and sideline and the sideline equipment for the coaches. And I briefly touched on that. I didn't go too much in detail there, but it wasn't just the 15,000 helmets. Like it's every sort of resource. So, I mean, you think about, all the resources that get put into like universities, right? Like just for example, like, like CU, like all the resources that could put into CU, or possibly even if you were to localize it to maybe Valor Christian High School, like these are just now just 8-man football, right? Like 8-man football, 6-man football. The upgrades that those particular, football teams are going to be receiving, it's a godsend to them because like everybody forgets about 8-man football. Everybody tends to forget about 6-man football. So think about them for a little bit. The fact that the ownership group now has shown that they matter to them, like that they absolutely matter in terms of the growth of their high school football program. So it isn't just the fact of like, oh, the 1A schools or the 2A schools or the 3A schools, 4A, 5A, et cetera, et cetera. It's also about like the 6-man, the 8-man, football league. So it's everything.
They had the 6 and 8-man leagues at the season finale against the Chiefs, up there with the 3A, 4A, all of the state championships. Everybody was there. So that was really, really cool. The Division I, everybody.
Yeah. Moving on. I feel like as we go through this rundown, I want to deviate off of it just a little bit because in order for us to get to free agency, we also have to look at some things possibly the draft wise. And you spent some time this last week at the East-West Shrine Bowl. Now, the East-West Shrine Bowl, in terms of, for anybody that doesn't know, is like just a separate collegiate all-star game. There's a third one that it's kind of like went over my head.
I can't remember.
But you have the East-West Shrine Bowl, and then you have the Senior Bowl, which we know that the Senior Bowl was able to be started today. It was one of the first days, if I feel like, for the Senior Bowl in terms of practices and content. And if you guys are really looking for good content, make sure you go follow Frankie Abbott at Frankie Films, and also Jacob Hermano on Twitter. I believe it's at JTR_14. Go follow them because both of them are over at the Senior Bowl right now, and obviously they're not the only ones. I believe Cecil is over there at the Senior Bowl. They got a bunch of other guys over there, and it's not just Bronco content, but of course, there's others that are just flowing over there with Senior Bowl. So, but nonetheless, Gage, you were there at the Shrine Bowl. What could you tell us just briefly about just your experience of just being there at the Shrine Bowl, and then we can kind of dive into some of the specifics after that.
So just in case fans are a little bit unfamiliar with the type of players that you're going to find in the Shrine Bowl, this is where you find some of the diamonds in the rough. These are players that may not have been the biggest stars at some of the biggest schools. Like there were Alabama and Georgia players and, University of Miami players, some of these top SEC programs. But there were also players from small schools at this event. And this is your opportunity to get noticed if you're not the biggest star in the world. And this is where we find these players that may be taken in day 3, sometimes late day 2 if you really stand out in this event. Some of the undrafted free agents who are gems. Brock Purdy was one of the stars of this event. Isaiah Pacheco. Tom Brady is probably the biggest star from this event of all time. You will find Hall of Fame players in this Shrine Bowl game. You will find players who are going to start on Sunday every single year. And it's all about who's going to stand out in the practices and in the game. But the practices are what are the most valuable out of these events. I didn't stay down there for the actual game because the practices are what you really get the most from. Scouts and executives from all 32 teams were down there. I saw multiple NFL GMs down there and a few head coaches. So this is an event that's really gaining a lot of popularity and a lot of attention. And I've actually compiled a list of 6 players, and this is just the beginning of players who stood out in this event. There's many, many more, but these are some of my guys from this event that the Denver Broncos could be interested in. So I'd love to go ahead and get started with that. My top player from this event, and if you go on Twitter and look up the Shrine Bowl, you will hear that this player was probably the best guy who was on the field, and that is Kobe Bryant, the cornerback out of Kansas. If you guys will remember, he had a really good game against the Colorado Buffaloes. He stood out multiple times in that game, and that's where he first caught my attention. But in these practices, he had multiple PBUs and interceptions. He had a perfect read on a pick on day 2, a perfect undercut on a slant in traffic, just impressive stuff. He's not afraid to get involved in run defense, and he's got that dog mentality. He gets in a dude's face after he wins a rep. He's not afraid to flex on him. He's not afraid to talk crap on the sideline, but at the same time, he's gassing up his teammates anytime they make a good play. He's one of those big-time energy dudes on the sideline that would inject a lot of juice into your football team. He would be an absolute steal on day 2. So that's probably my top player from the Shrine Bowl in these practices was Kobe Bryant. He stood out big time. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, the running back out of Arizona. I like to call him Jaleel McLaughlin on steroids. He's 5'11", 208 pounds, so a smaller framed back, but he's another one of those dogs, man. He finishes every single run. He lowers his shoulder. He wants that smoke. He wants that contact. And I got to interview him one-on-one after the practices were over, and he told me that he's not afraid to lay the lumber. He says that if there's one guy between him and daylight, he's going to run through that MFer's face. That's exactly what he told me. Small frame, but he's got good contact balance. He's able to stay upright. He's not going to be that guy who gets contacted and just falls down to the ground. He had some really good hands in the passing game. He didn't double clutch any of his balls. He didn't bobble anything. He did a great job tracking the ball on a wheel route. Again, he feels like Jaleel McLaughlin on steroids, and he did meet with the Denver Broncos brass at the Shrine Bowl. They had rooms at the Hyatt Hotel where teams could go in and meet with these players one-on-one, and the Broncos did meet with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in this one. Another guy who I got to interview, the tight end out of Iowa, Luke Lachey. Surprise, surprise, another tight end coming out of Iowa that seems that he's going to be a good player in the NFL. He loves the game, man. He was an excellent interview. He seems to be a willing and able blocker, which is obviously something that we have sorely missed here in Denver. Chris Manhertz, we talked about him, I believe, in the last show, somebody that the Broncos sorely missed last year. And he would also be a really good contributor in the passing game. He knows where to sit down in zone coverage. Based off talking to him, he seems like a high IQ type of player. He caught a seam ripper for a touchdown day 1, showed nice burst and explosiveness. So if the Broncos are unable to land one of the top tight ends in Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland, Luke Lachey would not be a bad consolation prize at all. Then I want to get into another position of need for the Broncos, and that is linebacker. The top linebacker for me that stood out in this event was Chandler Martin out of Memphis. This dude was a ball hawk. He was all over the field making plays, flying around. He knew where the ball was at all times. He had a great read for a pick 6 off of a tight end screen on day 1. He had a really, really nice snuffed out screen where it was a throwback screen to the running back. He blew that up for a loss. He blew up multiple outside runs. He clogged gaps up the middle. He could be an excellent value, like early day 3 pick for the Denver Broncos. And to round it off, I do want to shout out a couple of wide receivers, one from Colorado and one from Nebraska, starting off with LeJohntay Wester out of Colorado. He's a small receiver. If you guys haven't watched him play at Colorado, 5'11", 167 pounds, but he's shifty. He's quick. His route running is sensational. It's super crisp. He's got excellent hands and body control for his size. Had a really nice catch on the sideline, a nice toe tap catch. His cuts, they were clean, they were crisp, and I think that he could put a guy like Troy Franklin on notice here in Denver. He could be a really good slot receiver in the NFL. And finally, Isaiah Nair, big-bodied receiver at Nebraska, 6'3", 220 pounds. great catch radius. He high-pointed several balls. Great burst off the line of scrimmage for his size. He won several reps against press, had some good handwork at the line of scrimmage against press, had some nice catches in traffic, held onto the ball. Cam kind of told me before the podcast started that that's something he needs to work on, is being able to catch the ball consistently, but he showed really good hands at these practices. Good ability to stop on a dime. I was really impressed with that. And his head fake work, selling a go route, something that really stood out. I think Isaiah Nayer, although the Broncos have a couple of bigger body guys already in Cortland Sutton and Devon Vele, if they wanted to add another type of guy like that into the mix, I think Isaiah Nayer could be a fun addition.
Yeah, he's almost like a very much watered down version of like an AJ Green, and I think that when you look at from the just his body of work, like he was a player where he had a lot of drop issues, as the season was winding down. But I will say, when you look at just an overall story, like he was supposed to have a very large impact with the Texas Longhorns. I believe it was Isaiah Bond before Matthew Golden. I believe it was Bond or it was Golden, but nonetheless, when that wide receiver room of Adonai Mitchell, you had Golden and Bond, and then you had Isaiah Nayer. Well, in that particular offseason that they had before the spring game, he sustained an ACL injury. But before the year before he transferred over to Nebraska, Steve Sarkisian said that the wide receiver they were most looking forward to having in terms of a rather large role that year was Isaiah Nayer. So it's not a matter of talent necessarily for him. It's just he's got to be consistent. He's got to be healthy. He's got to be able to catch the football. So he's a fascinating one. But you also look specifically with what he was able to do at Wyoming. He put up rather large numbers. And I know that, the conference and, where he played in the Mountain West kind of gets dumbed down a little bit, in terms of level of competition, but he showed out. Like he absolutely showed out. He was Wyoming's version of a Torrey Horton. Like he was that type of player, for Wyoming. So I mean, he's definitely a guy I would want to file away. Obviously, we would be remiss if we didn't, continue the Colorado Lions just a little bit there. There was another quarterback that was down there named Shedeur Sanders. What did you notice about him down there? I mean, do you think he actually has all the makings to probably, be that first quarterback off the board, and it's not Cam Ward?
Well, Shedeur Sanders did meet with the Tennessee Titans down there. That was on the record, and I know that the Titans do like him. They did say that they wouldn't pass on the opportunity to take a generational talent at number one, which would obviously lend towards Travis Hunter, but they do need a quarterback, and it feels like they really do like Shedeur Sanders. Sanders did not participate in the practices, and he's not going to play in the game on Thursday. Apparently, the top three teams, the Browns, the Titans, and the Giants, all told him not to practice. So that pretty much tells you that he's probably going to go in the top three. I have heard some other buzz about the Raiders. That was kind of in the conversation down there a little bit, but based on this information about these top three teams telling him not to work out, that could lend itself to that. But we did see Shedeur on the sidelines with the tablet, coaching up his teammates, coaching up some receivers, and not just the Colorado guys, other guys as well. He showed really good leadership, and I was part of the media scrum that got to interview Shedeur at the Hyatt Hotel there in Frisco, and he was a great interview, very professional, very well-spoken, and he talked about his leadership and some of the things that he hopes to be able to do to showcase that I'm not just some Nepo baby. I'm actually a legit dude on the field. And those of us who are CU fans already knew that. But being able to see Shedeur in person, how he goes about his business, how he conducts himself with the media, That was a really cool opportunity. That was my first ever media scrum. We were all tight, condensed together, trying to hold up our phones. I tried to ask a question, but other reporters kept cutting me off. I wasn't in the front row.
Yeah.
I tried to weasel my way in there, but I had this one lady who kept literally pushing me aside because she wanted to ask him a question so bad. But that was a really awesome experience there with Shedeur, and just being able to see him down there after not being able to see him in person at CU. That was an awesome experience, and one of the things that made the trip worth it in itself.
I have to ask probably one of the more important questions, and it's one that might get latched on nationally, but because of the fact that you mentioned he won't be participating in the game or even some of the practices, do you think the optics still of that might actually look a bit bad though? Because like the way that I ask this is because a lot of people, and it's not just even we've had this conversation. It's a very crappy QB class. Like it's a very down QB class. If I was wanting to enter into a situation where I wanted to also prove and separate myself as a quarterback, I think I would want to partake in some of that, like partake in the practices, partake in, in a lot of those games. Do you think possibly the optics of him not partaking in those practices or even this game might kind of be a little bit of a turn off a little bit?
I don't think I have a real fair answer to that, because it does seem like those teams told him not to participate. But by that same token, the way that he was conducting himself, even though he wasn't participating, again, coaching up his teammates, gassing them up, he was very involved with what was going on. And whenever, it was like a punt period or something like that, he'd be talking over with various team executives. I'm not going to say which teams just for discretion's sake, but he was talking with team executives. So, I do think that maybe to fans it would be bad optics, but I think teams knew what the situation was and they accounted for that accordingly.
Yeah. Now moving forward from the Shrine game to the free agents, I feel like that was probably a best way to talk about that. As you go from the Shrine, the Shrine to the now talking about free agents a little bit. When you look at the Denver Broncos and you look at the free agency market, and this is something where I think that you and I kind of have touched a little bit on, in terms of, sometimes in the shows, with Mike, Mundungus, and Glenn, you look at the early stage of this, right? You look at the early stage of the free agency market, and we aren't going to be seeing in terms of free agency and everything like happen probably until like maybe mid-February in terms of some strong rumors start to come out, because at that point you'll have the combine start to get leaking a little bit, and then that's when you start hearing a little bit about the free agency and stuff like that. So you and I kind of figured you and I would go through some of the free agency fits a little bit for this team, maybe some dream scenarios, but who are some dream fits for this football team?
So I've already talked about some of the free agents that I definitely would be interested in. We all know the big positions that the Denver Broncos have to upgrade: running back, tight end, linebacker, defensive line, dependent on certain moves they make there with guys like DJ Jones. You think about maybe safety, depending on what they want to do with PJ Locke, because the numbers are very favorable to move on from him. So there's a lot to think about there. I think that this team wants to fill their needs in free agency and then be able to take top players available in the draft. That seems to be a philosophy that this team wants to do this year, especially because they've got some money to spend. They did that a couple of years ago. The first year was Sean Payton, where they brought in Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers, filled two very massive needs there in free agency, went on that spending spree. It kind of feels like that. I do think that running back in free agency is going to be somewhere that they will dabble in. They dabbled in free agency in the running back position last year with Josh Jacobs. Jacobs ultimately chose to sign with the Packers. Najee Harris has been a name that has been thrown around. He has been a guy who has stayed healthy his entire career. He's rushed for 1,000 yards in each fourth season of his career. So for me, I would definitely be interested in Najee Harris. I've also heard Aaron Jones being thrown around. Problem with Jones for me is that he's on the wrong side of 30. So I'm probably going to pivot more in the direction of Najee Harris, who's 27, 28, has a few more years left in the tank as opposed to a guy like Aaron Jones, unless it's like a 1-year deal with maybe an option for another year or two. But Najee Harris at running back. Tight end, I think that Juwan Johnson, he's got those ties with Peyton in New Orleans. He's got some ties with Pete Carmichael as well. So that could be a possibility. I'm still going to pound the table for trading for David Njoku. That's something that I'm not going to let go until we see some movement there with Njoku. Linebacker, Zach Bond immediately comes to mind. We talked about him a little bit earlier in the show. Another guy who has ties to this regime from New Orleans. Then we think about, safety. I'll have to go and actually look and see who some of the free agent safeties are. I can't remember.
Holland is probably the biggest one.
Okay, yeah. Javon Holland. That's a name that Broncos country has definitely thrown around. So I expect them to be very active in free agency. But in terms of the draft, as we just talked about the Shrine Bowl, this feels almost like the Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta draft. The Broncos are following a very similar blueprint as the Detroit Lions going about their rebuild. And this is the year where they need to add their playmaker at running back or multiple playmakers at running back, and they need to add their playmaker at tight end. This feels like rounds 1 and 2, in some order, it's going to be running back and tight end.
Yeah. It's going to be such an interesting one because, as you mentioned, and I think that the fact that they're going to be going a little bit about as far as filling some of the needs, I think is going to be interesting because, one player in particular, it might trigger some Bronco fans. But I think the best bang for your buck and getting him in the building, I think is going to be a big deal. Now, he's got a lot of, red flag, probably the biggest red flag of it all. But I'm all in favor of bringing Nick Chubb in the building for like a 1-year deal and give him into Bo Lowry's hands. I think that's like the one thing you can say is like, he's not had the best injury history. You know what I mean? And so, but you give him to an organization like the Broncos where that, they can probably work with him. And it is just a 1-year, deal that they can work with him. So it isn't like, you're attached to the hip with him for 3, 4, 5 years, and then so much so you are able to still draft a running back rather high, and so the best bang for your buck is you can still go out and draft a player like a Devin Neal, or, if it just so happens that you don't want to go out and get an Omarion Hampton, you can still take an Omarion Hampton, and you have a Hampton and Chubb situation. So I think that it's just it's a very attractive type of situation, and also with free agency, and of course with the draft is I wouldn't rule out trades either. I would not rule out some possible trades, and I think that when you look at just the overall landscape of it. Very curious to see how things are going to be unfolding into that trade market. Obviously, given now the Darren Mugi connection with the New York Jets, a lot of it's going to be, pinged to not just Garrett Wilson, but Breece Hall as well. So it's just, it's going to be one that's going to be worth following, of course, and I do think that the Chris Godwin situation, I think, is going to be a very fun one. Because he does fit. He absolutely does fit here. And there are some, bit of some, Penn State type of connections here from the, for the Denver Broncos, with Chris Godwin. So I think, and then maybe if you're able to luck into it, I think what would be a interesting free agency is if it just so happens that the Cincinnati Bengals do not sign Mike Gesicki. He might be a player for a 2-year, 3-year deal a little bit that I would want to file away. He's a player that, you could sign him, and then at that point, maybe push your tight end a little bit, a little bit further down, and then, you can draft your blocking tight end. Or if you feel like Juwan Johnson's a bit more of a capable blocker, or so, you don't necessarily, you can bring in a Juwan Johnson, or heck, you could just keep it the way it is. I think that's not talked about enough. And since you just go out and get Gesicki, you have Adam Troutman in the building, who's a rather, consistent tight end in terms of the way that like he is as a blocker. He's not talked about enough in terms of the season that he had and the way that they used him. Nate Atkins is another one. But I think that just simply having Gesicki in that building, I think would be interesting to say the least, now that you have Troutman and Gesicki and Nate Atkins. And it is definitely for a fact an upgraded tight end room. And I think that just how is Denver going to attack the wide receiver room? It's pretty obvious, that Sean Payton has been on the record, regardless of how we feel about it. He's been on record saying that he loves this wide receiver room. So
I got the same sentiment down at the Shrine Bowl, actually.
Yeah. So it's going to be really interesting to see how things be attacked here. Do you just add the veteran? Do you just add the veteran of a Chris Godwin or just an Amari Cooper? How exactly is that all going to be shaken out? So if they do end up attacking all their needs, I think one in particular that's going to be curious in terms of this draft gauge is that defensive line. Is how exactly do they attack that defensive line if it's going to be to the draft? And regardless if DJ Jones is a priority to re-sign, you still need to address that defensive line.
For sure. I want to make sure I get this kid's name right here, because there was a defensive lineman, Jordan Phillips out of Maryland, another Jordan Phillips defensive lineman coming in. He really stood out at the Shrine Bowl as well, had multiple nice reps in the pit. Great bull rush, good balance, good anchor, all of that stuff. I thought that he had some really nice power to him. So this D-line class has some diamonds in the rough. And if the Denver Broncos can build off of their previous history where they found some of these diamonds in the rough before, they could find a really good player on the defensive line for a really good value later on in the draft.
Yeah. And they might just take one round one. Like, don't rule it out. Like they absolutely might. I think Big Mike is in the Walter Nolan fan club in terms of round one, and I think that's where it's going to be interesting, because when you do look at the day twos, the day threes of the draft, that really is where the meat and bones of the offensive weapons really does lie. So it's going to be interesting to see how all things shake out, because I think one of the scenarios when you even look at the draft gauge where I don't hate the idea of double dipping a tight end. I don't hate the idea of double dipping at running back. And when I'm saying double dipping at running back, I'm saying, you go out and you get an Amari and Hampton, and then you go a little bit more expensive in terms of, you dip back into the well on late day 2 and you go draft Devin Neal or something. And then you go out and you get Hampton and Neal. And then at that point, you have a far more competitive room. Now, if that does happen, it would kind of, tell us a little bit about how they feel about, Audric Estime, and just overall with that room, specifically of Julian McLaughlin, Estime, even Blake Watson for the matter. So I think it would tell us a lot about that. And I think one way for us to even tell about free agency is something that we should also talk about, is that the Broncos are losing coaches, but it's of note, the coaches they're losing, Gage, are from rooms that vastly underperformed.
Yes.
So Declan Doyle moves on to be the offensive coordinator with the Chicago Bears under Ben Johnson. And then you have the linebackers coach that just broke down. Greg Manusky that just broke down today. They let him go. And then you have another coach that was or he went to go accept another job. I believe John Morton went to go be the offensive coordinator for the Lions. And then you have special teams, which I think there might be some movement here. The special teams coordinator might actually end up being some movement. It's either going to be Chris Banjo or it might end up being Darren Rizzi. I think we all know it's trending in the direction of Darren Rizzi as things have been kind of moving in the last 24 to 48 hours. But I think that should also tell us, Gage, like the coaches they're losing, their positions that they've sucked at in terms of 2024.
Yes, and the Broncos have prioritized retaining two coaches that they feel very highly about in Davis Webb and Jim Leonhard. Yes, which Big Mike is saying here. Mm-hmm. Both of those guys did have some opportunities this offseason, but they both want to stay in place, and the Broncos heavily prioritized keeping them in place. They feel really confident about the work that Davis Webb has done in developing Bo Nix, and they love what Jim Leonhard has done in that secondary. And they hope that if they do lose Vance Joseph to a head coaching job, that Jim Leonhard will take over as defensive coordinator. That's what the message definitely seems like here. Pull that last comment back up.
Yeah. When we're talking about double dipping?
Yes. And I think that they could do some double dipping at multiple positions in terms of free agency in the draft. Yeah. You look at the Lions. They went out and signed David Montgomery to that free agent deal, and then they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round. I think that the Broncos could do something very similar. And then tight end, go get Dave. Yeah, or you could get Nick Chubb and then draft a running back high, That actually could be a very feasible option as well. Then at tight end, you could trade for David Njoku and draft Luke Lachey, because I know everybody in Broncos country is pounding the table for Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland. Based on what I was hearing at the Shrine Bowl, in order to get both of those players, the Broncos would have to trade into the top 10. Same goes for Ashton Genty.
Yeah.
All three of those players will likely be gone by the time the Denver Broncos pick.
Paul, it's going to be interesting. This is one that I think Gage and I always have like these fun conversations with, because it's the Nate Atkins dilemma. That's where it kind of falls in line. It's the Nate Atkins dilemma. And it's one where if you would probably ask us, based on efficiency, and, kudos to Big Mike, because he put it into the chat, and I believe it was for mainly Broncos. But like Nate Atkins is the fullback / tight end, right? Big Mike dropped it in where he was the most efficient player, I think, statistically for the team of all tight ends. He was like the most efficient tight end, but he's versatile. He's not exactly a Kyle Juszczyk, but they could use him in various different ways, like that. And so it's certainly one to certainly follow. And yes, Paul, Juwan Johnson, we do mention him, we mentioned him a little bit earlier. And I think it's one of the reasons why I'm curious about the Little Jordan Humphrey part of this, because it's like, I'm not saying that they will do that, but they did that. Sean Payton did do that with Juwan Johnson, where Juwan was a former wide receiver, converted him to a tight end. Now, probably the best way to go about this is you replace, someone in your tight end room with someone like that you actually have trusted over the years. And also of note, by the way, in terms of Zach Bond, he's got the connection to Jim Leonhard. And I think that, the Jim Leonhard thing is so fascinating here, and Davis Webb, because, and I want to just take this from the Jim Leonhard side of things, Gage, because this is a guy that was shafted, like absolutely shafted from, getting a head coaching job with Wisconsin. He should have gotten the head coaching job with Wisconsin. And where do they go? They go to Luke Fickell, and it's not worked out. It is absolutely not worked out in Wisconsin. And a lot of fans have been clamoring for Leonhard to replace Fickell as of this last offseason as head coach. So that might happen. But considering the bridges that have been burned between Leonhard and Wisconsin, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. And I think if you're Leonhard, and I tweeted this actually yesterday, don't be surprised if Jim Leonhard is prioritizing stability over anything else right now in terms of the coaching, in terms of the coaching cycle. He has been shafted. He has not been promoted in essence to defensive coordinator just yet. but I would not just assume that this is just for defensive coordinator either. Like, he is a guy that, as I said, has been shafted over the years. So don't be surprised if, it's a very lofty type of, claim, but don't be surprised if Leonard is with Denver for a rather long period of time based on stability.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think that that's something that a lot of young coaches value, especially after they've been shafted in previous opportunities like you talked about earlier. So for Leonard, I could totally see that. We actually just had some news drop about a secondary coach with a different team. The Ravens have hired Chuck Pagano as their secondary coach. Not the news I was expecting to hear. I thought Chuck was done, but Boulder, Colorado native, Chucky boy's back in it, baby.
Man, who knows? We might actually get John Pagano that ends up being the linebacker coach for the Broncos if they want to certainly bring it in.
He's right in our backyard, man. Give him a call.
He is certainly definitely in that backyard, and obviously a local product. As far as like any other talking points that you have, Gage, obviously we're going to be talking about the Super Bowl more and more as things get closer. But is there something, maybe even another nugget with the Shrine Bowl maybe we didn't necessarily get a touch on, or maybe something that you wanted to kind of touch on before we wrapped up the show here?
I had one and I can't remember what it was, honestly.
Yeah. One player, just briefly touch on it because of the fact that I'm obsessed. Nash Hutmaker is probably another name that I would want to file away. Nash Hutmaker and Ty Robinson. Ty Robinson is over there at the Senior Bowl. He's probably going to end up being drafted a lot higher than Nash. Robinson, from what I've heard from the Husker guys, is that he's actually going to be garnering some second-round buzz in terms of even third-round buzz. So don't be surprised if that ends up happening. Nash Hutmaker, just briefly shout him out. He's a former high school wrestler, all-state wrestler. He also wrestled collegiately in Nebraska, and we know that people who wrestle and have transitioned to football full-time, more often than not, it seems like it's they have a tendency to kind of work out more often than not in the NFL. So I wouldn't be the least bit surprised, if he's on some teams' radars. Not saying Broncos, but I mean, given the fact that they need to, get some D-line help, I wouldn't be the least bit upset, if they took a Nash Hutmaker, whose nickname, by the way, is Polar Bear. He can't wear 0, by the way, but his nickname is Polar Bear. So what better kind of player to have as like a polar bear as far as, on the D-line. So
yeah, I thought he had good hands, good pad level, had a really nice anchor into the ground. Like, he wasn't losing his footing out there. I thought that you showed me that one rep on Twitter. I had seen it in person.
Yeah.
I mean, he absolutely pancaked one of the offensive linemen. So
one of the best reps probably of the entire week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think I remember standing next to it, and I saw a couple of, they had to have been offensive line coaches because they were bigger set dudes, and they were like, "Oh yeah!" Like, they loved it.
Yep, he's a nitty gritty type of guy for sure. Obviously, coming from the and those Nebraska kids are tough, just like Cam Jurgens.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, and was there any other sort of thing that you want to touch on? Maybe a free agent that we didn't necessarily get to touch on. I mean, obviously we're going to spend a lot of time on free agency, but
I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you to everybody that chimed into this chat and into this stream. We're going to be doing an episode of Mainly Broncos tomorrow. And we'll get a chance to, talk about, probably some other things, to touch on a little bit. Obviously, we're going to probably talk more about this Kansas City Chiefs and Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl that's, upcoming. We'll probably, dabble a little bit maybe as far as, free agency and, get a chance to look at it. And as far as talk about maybe some of the prospects that, as some of the same stuff that we've been hearing here tonight. I just want to, again, give you guys a quick shout out and thank you guys for hopping into the chat. It was a very lively chat for just being Gage and myself. Not Glenn and Mundungus, obviously, on the stream here tonight. We just want to say thank you. Make sure you hit that subscribe button over there on the MHRT Network page. and follow Gage and myself on Twitter. Gage obviously did a fantastic job covering the East West Shrine Bowl over there last week. So make sure you follow him at Gage Madrid NFL. He obviously does stuff too, of course, with the Denver Broncos Syndicate that he does over there on YouTube. So make sure you check that out. It is a poppin' stream and network over there on YouTube. He does great stuff. Obviously, make sure to check out the show that I do with mainly, as I said, for Wednesday. It's every Wednesday night at 7:30, barring some schedule changes. But again, we're not just the only ones. There's a great slew of shows here on the network that you guys can go over and check out depending on what meets your fancy. Again, hit that subscribe button over on MHRT Network. It's been a blast. We'll see you guys tomorrow. I will see you guys tomorrow for an episode of Mainly Broncos. Peace.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast racking up the flight miles. So high, I might never come down, so what, this is my life.